Hey, my name's Julian Faust. Welcome to the Profits and Panels podcast. Today I'm joined by Amy Simpkins. Amy, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks, Julian.
Of course, yeah. I'd like you to take us back to how you got started over at Grid Analytics. Can you tell me about the origins of that towards how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. It was back in 2016, and my business partner had been working at the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado for 7 years. And the transition into renewable energy and distributed energy for him had been a career change. So he was continually learning about the industry, what were the problems facing the industry, what were the opportunities there. But also, in addition to just learning the new industry, distributed energy has evolved so much, so fast, since the early 2000s until certainly now in 2025, but including that time period in the teens. And so as the industry evolved, the needs for modeling, analysis, preliminary design, how you assess what makes a good project were also evolving very rapidly. Solar power had been pretty established technology, but we saw solar power go from a niche technology that was used by enthusiasts, scientists, hippies, and preppers, into the mainstream by the early 2000s and the early teens. And right around that time, and this is something that Travis was working on at NREL, around that time, battery storage started to come into the conversation because as solar evolved from something that was very niche into something that was more mainstream, we as an industry started to see that the non-dispatchability of solar power, meaning you can only have solar energy when the sun is out and when your solar panels are producing, you don't have control of that. That is dependent upon the time of day and the weather and the season of the year. So battery storage and energy storage in general, whether it's batteries or other storage technologies, started to come into the conversation in the early teens in a big way, in a more mainstream way. But the trick is that a lot of people who were looking at early energy storage in those years were looking at it through the same lens as they had been looking through solar. And the fact that storage became so popular was because of its dispatchability, because of its controllability. And so the conversation about how a battery would be controlled to maximize your energy investment, to maximize project economics, to maximize the way you used that solar energy or wind, which is also non-dispatchable. You only get wind when the wind blows. How that would be done sounded very simple in theory, but once you start digging down into the details, the devil's always in the details. And it's very complicated to determine how to properly dispatch energy storage when it's working in concert with other technologies, particularly solar and wind, but maybe also fuel-based generators or combined heat and power. Dispatchability is a controls problem, and problems can get very complicated very fast. So my business partner had been, I'll get back to myself in a minute. My business partner had been working on this kind of in theory at a theoretical level at the lab and putting together models. But even at the time he was putting together models at the lab, there weren't a lot of practical examples of batteries deployed in conjunction with solar or in conjunction with wind at the time in the early teens. And while he was at NREL, he started to be approached by outside entities who actually wanted to deploy projects. So it got less theoretical, it got more practical, it got more real. And he was starting to get approached for outside consulting at the lab, which sometimes can happen, sometimes can't happen. There are rules, but the point is, we started to take a look at it. And at the time, I am an aerospace engineer by education. I worked for Lockheed Martin in spacecraft design, development, and operations for 10 years in the early part of my career. And I had already stepped away from aerospace into more of a business consulting, looking for business opportunities, deciding how to structure businesses, how to structure service offerings, how to structure technology development to address a market. So, of course, as I'm talking with my business partner about the work that he's doing at NREL and the work that he is being approached for in a consulting fashion outside of his work at the lab, I'm seeing an opportunity. I'm seeing a market opportunity that says, hey, like, people need this. Commercial and industrial facilities need to know how to assess what type of battery would be good for them and what the benefits would be, because it's harder than solar, because it's controllable. In fact, not only is it controllable, but you must control a battery in order for it to do anything. In the early days, in kind of like the late teens, so we started the company in 2016. In the late teens, in those early days of batteries, we had many clients who would say they installed a battery and now it just sits there and it doesn't do anything. And we said, well, did they install a controller or some type of control software with it? And they were like, were we supposed to? Like, it wasn't common knowledge because solar didn't need anything like that. Solar, you put out there, it absorbs energy from the sun, it does its thing. And batteries needed to be commanded. And so there was a lot of miscommunication in the industry in those like early battery projects in the late teens about what control was necessary, what a controller actually is supposed to do. And that didn't even get to the part of there are multiple ways you can control a battery and what's the best. And so that is the foundation of the company. I think that what my business partner was doing at NREL was very theoretical and in the like modeling and analysis portion. And when he tried to ask the question of, okay, but how does this work in practice? How does this work when it is the real world and there's real world variability? That question wasn't particularly getting answered at the lab. And so we saw a commercial opportunity to say someone is going to have to answer this question of how does this work in reality when you don't have perfect foresight, you don't have a year's worth of data and you're analyzing it all at once. You don't know what's going to happen in the next hour or the next 24 hours or the next week. And so you have to adaptively look at how you want to operate your system in order to get the best value. So that is the origin story. We joined forces, me as the CEO on the business side, although I am an engineer. And so I definitely nerd out on all of the technology, and him as the CTO driving the technology forward to first consult on and model systems in the preliminary phases, but then to develop a controls platform that would drive optimal return on investment.
I know that you have two sides to the business. We have the software facing side and the consulting part of the business. And last time we talked, you said you're looking to grow more on the software side of things. On that side, what's been the most effective strategy for acquiring new clients there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's sort of three different ways you can approach it. We can approach it. In the beginning, because we were coming from a consulting background, we would approach or be approached by individual sites that want to put in a system. So we would have a site that could be a wastewater treatment plant, or it could be a small manufacturing facility in an industrial park. And they're frustrated about their utility bills. They want to do some distributed energy to relieve that. Maybe they also are worried about power quality and they want to have this like resilient backup power and these stabilizing assets so that they have options. And so you can work directly with sites. Working directly with sites often feels not so scalable because it is, it's one project at a time. There's also we have companies that have been installing solar for years and now are starting to get into adding storage to their solar, either because their clients are demanding it, they know the benefits of dispatchability. And so those are like, EPC, engineer, procure, construct firms. Sometimes they're installers. Sometimes they go by EFI, engineer, furnish, and install. But that type of a company that's, because a lot of times when a site they will say, okay, I want to install solar plus storage. Who do I ask? Normally their first stop is an installer because they're like, well, you guys will put this in. Tell me what I should do. But oftentimes, even though the installers, like I said, are used to speccing out solar, and solar is pretty easy to model and pretty predictable, these installers, these EPC firms, don't really have a good handle on how to size, design, model the benefits of batteries because of what I previously said. It's hard, it's complicated, it's much more complicated than solar by itself. And so we have had good success partnering with EPC firms and installers who want to do what they do. They want to sell product, they want to install equipment, they want to help maintain the equipment and make it work, but they don't necessarily how to do that higher level analysis and higher level operational planning for the more complex systems. So we found a lot of success working with those kinds of clients. And it works really well because, like I said, a site, when they're looking for who to call when they want to do a project, it's a natural thing to call someone who's already installing the solar in the area. And we don't do that. And so that's a very good connection. So instead of working, I think you would call, even though most of the clients we work with are commercial and industrial. So I think across the board, you would call us a B2B company, business to business, because we're always working with companies. But if you consider the site, the individual commercial or industrial site, to be the end client, the end user, that would be more of a B2C, B to consumer sales approach. And when we work with partners who are the installers or the engineers, that's more of a B2B business relationship where we are both working together to serve the needs of the eventual consumer. And then the third area where we've had some success is working with battery companies directly. Right now, with the nascent state of commercial batteries and even utility scale batteries, there's a little bit of a question about whose responsibility is that controller? Whose responsibility is the intelligence to dispatch the battery? Is it the responsibility of the designer who might be at the EPC firm, the engineering firm that's doing it? Or is it the responsibility of the battery vendor to include that as part of the package? And some battery vendors do include it, and some battery vendors don't. And some battery vendors are kind of in the middle where they have a default controls option, but they're also willing to integrate a controller of the site's choice if there is a different control. So it's not very standardized. It varies depending. And so working with battery companies can be really great for us because, again, it's kind of like with the engineering firm, it's a mutually beneficial relationship. We can get our controller into projects, but they have the confidence in their sales process when their client says, but what's this battery going to do for me? They can have the confidence to say, hey, we have a really great controls partner that knows what they're doing and is going to drive maximum return for you off of this investment.
Yeah, and Amy, what are the biggest challenges you're currently facing in the business?
I would say that one of the biggest challenges is the fact, and I've already talked about this, that battery analysis and battery design is complicated. And we're coming into an industry where it's previously been easy. And there's even a lot of the commercial site hosts are used to thinking about solar. Maybe they've done it on another facility or they did it at their house. And so they're looking at a solar proposal and they're like, this is what a solar proposal should look like. And when we start to talk about batteries and we start to talk about the variation in operations and we start to talk about the complexity of how utility bill savings are calculated, it's easy to lose people. We get to the end of a presentation and they ask a question and we're like, well, that's not really a relevant question when you talk about batteries, but they are asking it because they've heard it in the context of solar. Battery storage in this application is still pretty nascent. And our industry has done a very good job of marketing them as proven technology and proven solution. And even the ones that have been deployed out there have been operating for a maximum of 5 years. The ones that are, the first kind of commercial systems that weren't like science experiments and research experiments. And so there's just not a lot of data out there. There's not a lot of operational examples out there. And even clients who have installed either economically motivated batteries that are there to reduce, demand charges and utility bills, or resilient backup systems, find that operations of these systems is not so smooth in real life and maybe have people they answer to, whether that's the CFO of the company or it's board members in a municipality that say, this didn't end up being a good deal for us. This isn't working. And it's like, well, it is working, but we are constantly learning about how they work together and what the operational and maintenance requirements are on these systems. So that level of complexity can make the sales cycle difficult. And I would say then the second thing, and it kind of dovetails off of that, is that the sales cycles for storage projects in particular, or storage integrated projects, are long. It takes a long time, several iterations. And so moving business and driving revenue has very long tails on it, in I think a longer way than solar does. And I'm talking at the like commercial and industrial sector, not residential and not utility scale. Those have their own types of development cycle problems. And because of the nascent nature of the technology, either explicitly or just indirectly, sites are often very cautious. And so even if we're able to show them a modeled return on investment, they oftentimes don't trust it with good reason. I mean, with good reason, there's still a lot of variability in how battery return on investment gets delivered. And it's definitely not as predictable as solar. And so I'm not knocking anyone for not trusting, the modeling. And I say that as a modeler. We do our best to take a conservative approach and to identify areas of risk where they are. But it has been surprising to me that even clients where we can show them a really great ROI, such a great ROI that even if we're wrong by half, even if the operations turn out to not work by half, they'd still be well in the black. And to see them look at it and go, I don't know, and hesitate and have it not turn into a deployed project. So I think on one side of that, I am very nervous about the amount of confidence our industry projects about the maturity of technology. But also, I want to sell systems. So I want our clients to have faith that the systems are going to work, and they just don't. So it's a delicate balance of being honest about the risk but encouraging the client when we do think it's a great opportunity for them.
And which metrics within your business are you most looking to improve? So I know you're speaking on some of the challenges like the sales cycle and that sort of thing, but where are you looking to make your business better and more efficient on the business operation side of things, not as much the technical side?
Yeah, great question. So we started out as a two-person show here. It was myself and my business partner. And basically, like, how it is when you're starting a business, you're the chief cook and bottle washer. So the same two people are writing sales proposals, doing business development conversations, then closing the deal, then executing the work and writing up a nice report and delivering it, sending the invoices. Every single thing in the company is done by the same two people. And as we have evolved and grown and hired employees, so there's a transition there of When do you, the original two founders, stop doing all of the work or the majority of the work and stop having your fingers involved in every single pie and stay in your lane a little bit more? And I would say we're kind of in the middle of a transition like that. I very much look forward to the day when there are projects at this company that I don't know anything about, or I have heard their name one time in a report or something like that. That is currently not the case. I currently am pretty involved in every single project, although we just completed a study where one of our engineers took the lead. And other than a cursory supervisory role, I wasn't super involved in like the technical work. And that's a big deal. That's a milestone for us. And so I would say from, from a business operations perspective, like it's a different mindset for a leader to be managing people doing work, to be leading a strategic vision for a group of people, than it is for a founder to be responsible for absolutely everything. And I think this is something that all founders face because all founders start small and independent. And then as you grow, the dynamic in leadership of leading a team and delegating responsibility is way different. It's a way different mindset. And it's a constant shifting of how I show up to work every day and how I do business because I'm thinking of it from a different perspective. As a leader, as a CEO, I would like to spend my goal right now is to spend more of my time thinking strategically about the direction of the business and about approaches to getting new clients and getting new projects and the tech development, and less time tactically. And by tactically, I mean executing project work and executing business that we want. I would rather hand the execution of business that we want off to my team and then think strategically about the next thing. And so, again, it's a very different mindset to be thinking strategically as a leader versus thinking tactically. And right now, I'm not in a clear shift. Right now, I'm in the mushy middle where I do both. I have to do both. And so I think that's a challenge that you don't often hear about when you hear about like, startups. You hear about like the founding story and the two people who did everything. And then you hear about, to raise and now they have a team of 50 people, you know. And this messy middle of like the growth time is not often talked about.
And you're speaking a bit about strategy and just wanting to be more of like the mastermind behind it all versus specifically executing every single piece. For your employees and even yourself, which of those repetitive tasks what do you want to get eliminate from your business so you guys become more effective? Even if that means involving AI in the process.
Eliminate my business or eliminate from the
No,
business or eliminate from my plate is the
from
question.
your plate for the business or for the employees within your business.
Okay, yeah. So the biggest thing for me right now is like accounting, business accounting, and keeping the books. And because again, we're transitioning from a time when I did all of the bookkeeping and all of the, and all of the accounting. And I'm learning, and this is something that AI I don't think can solve. I'm learning as a leader about how much of the company finance I need to be involved in, how down in the weeds I need to be without going through every line item, and being responsible for every single line item. That's a learning experience for me as a leader. I do think that there's an interesting opportunity there. I could see, an AI opportunity for helping, maybe engineers or at least non-accountants, with some of the accounting work, which feels very, very tedious to me. And so I think, that's a big area for sure. But I'm cautious, especially at this point in my business. I'm sort of cautious to outsource to AI because a lot of the work is still very customized and very we're building a lot. It's very creative and innovative. And so those pieces of the work can't really be, they're not AIable. You need to have something that's standardized. You need to have processes that are standardized, and you need to have patterns. And that right now, like for even in our like CRM or business development activities, we're not very standardized yet. These processes of how we're getting clients that I described, we're still developing that, and we're still developing um, how we go about it. And so I feel that we're a little bit early to be automating some of that. We did look into some big tools like HubSpot for, CRM. And we're just not in that place yet. And there's actually a question of if our type of business is ever going to be standardized enough to use that. HubSpot is really great if you're, running Facebook ads or social media ads, or if you're, and if you're selling B2C, you want to move a lot of volume. I confess that I personally come out of the spacecraft business where you're building a lot of one offs. The spacecraft business isn't about volume or assembly lines. And to me, the microgrid business is currently very much the same. It's very customized. It's very much, each project is very unique, and it feels a lot like spacecraft development. Now, that could just be confirmation bias because of my background. And so I think that's always a, even though AI brings a new level to it, I think that that is always a question in innovation. One of my hobbies is innovation theory. So pardon me while I nerd out for a minute. But I think anytime you have innovation, this is a tale as old as time of when you move from customized, creative, and innovative ideas into more of a standardized factory assembly line Henry Ford approach, right? Henry Ford dealt with this and he didn't have AI. He dealt with this on when is it time to stop building individual cars as a one off and move it into an assembly line style process. And for him, he revolutionized industry by with the concept of the assembly line because the industry was ready for that. And I think that's true for any industry and any technology is how do we move it from customization and creativity into more standardized approach? And the hot button technology of the moment that can help us with that isn't the assembly line, it's AI. And so there you go. That's my soapbox for the day.
And within the next 12 to 24 months, whether it's revenue, expanding the team, what do you want for your business in a growth perspective?
Oh, what a good question. I liken a lot of what we do right now, and this is even tactically on renewable energy projects. It's like folding down the top of a cardboard box. You have to fold one flap and then another flap and then another flap. But then when you get to the end, you have to kind of like lift the first flap, and all the flaps kind of have to go down at the same time in order to fold the box, right? And so that is happening for us right now, like on our design projects. That like I feel like for a renewable energy project, you have to get the financing, the business model, the technology, the sizing, the installer all lined up, and they all have to come together like at the same time. It's crazy. And my answer to your question about how what I'd like to see in the business is kind of the same. I definitely would like to see some more team growth because of what I just talked about. I think that the biggest barrier to our growth is the leadership being too tactical and not strategic enough. And we need to encourage that transition. So, in order to have a bigger team, we need more revenue. So, I think the other big pillar of being able to grow is nailing down a more standardized sales process. And I know I just had a soapbox rant about standardization versus creativity and where we're at in that. And so that plays a factor. But I'm also a big fan of standardize where you can, customize where you should, and standardize where you can. And to me, sales process can be standardized, even and outreach process, marketing and BD process can be standardized, even if the ultimate technical project is not so standardized, process can be standardized. And so that's what I am working on at the strategic level when I can get there is a more focused and standardized approach to driving new business, and so that it's less labor intensive and perhaps more automatic and leverages the skills of the team we have.
Amy, thanks so much for joining us today. Where can our audience find you and your business online?
Awesome. Yes, I am Amy Simpkins. I'm on LinkedIn. You can feel free to connect there. Our business is MuGrid Analytics. Mu is like the Greek letter mu, which stands for micro in physics and engineering. So mugrid.com is our homepage on the net. We're also on LinkedIn. So those are the best ways to find us.
Thank you, Amy.